So I think we're going to take any questions from Zoom attendees, or is it more like watch?
Usually we would,
Yeah.
and usually people do have questions in the chat. I think Giselle is going to be running that, which means that we'll take them from the room Zoom. But usually people in the chat are active. It's not just, people for André and walking the dog or whatever. So we'll do pop in.
Yeah, it's true. If you hang out for an online card, you hang anyone's.
Yeah.
People sometimes get it away if it's not for them. But this one is very clear.
Yeah. There was a moment where we were worried that you might not have a job.
Jeff has been.
It took you a while to book those flights though.
Thank you so much. Do you remember partner?
How are you?
I haven't seen you. Yeah, in a flash.
It's easy. I think it was at the DSI event. We had dinner instead of the union, I think.
Which is my experience.
Yeah.
This is our mouse.
I'm in how black kids study digital technologies. Take a few generations.
So we like to stand for being first speaker. I just joined the hands on working.
Yeah, I'll stay on them. You can.
You don't have 2 minutes. I'm like,
Oh, right here.
Hopefully by.
Okay.
What? Oh,
André, I'm gonna give you
are people, are we currently live? Yes, we are. Okay. All right.
You appreciate
So.
Is that you, Lisa?
Lisa.
Yeah, so the rough turn is yours. On it. And nobody is being mic'd because we have these
Yeah.
microphones.
So I think we're live on Zoom. We'll get started here in just a minute. Those of you here in person, there are some snacks and drinks over on the left side, your left, my right side of this room. Please do help yourself whenever the mood strikes you. Bill and Chris, are we good? All right, we're good. Let's get started. So, hi everyone, and thank you for coming. My name is Jeff Nagy. I am a Histo Network Postdoctoral Fellow and also the faculty chair of a series, Search Engines. And it's a pleasure to welcome you all here today for a conversation entitled Octavia Butler and I, Other Radical Possibilities of Technology. Before we get into the conversation, I have just a couple logistical things, introductions to run through, which I'll do right now. So this is mostly for those of you who are on Zoom. We'll begin shortly. Here's some guidelines for this event. If you have an access or technology-related concern or question, you can get in touch with Giselle Mills, who's in the Zoom webinar chat. And if you have a question too, please put it in the chat. We'll turn to questions after the conversation here, both from Zoom and from the room here. And this is a closed session, so to respect our panel's privacy, please no recording, either on your home devices if you're watching this on Zoom or here in the room. If you're in the room, I'll see you do it, so I'll know. But no recording, no live tweeting, no live.
Wait, what? Hold on.
I know for André this will actually be very difficult, but I'm going to ask his forbearance just for this next hour and a half. So first, this event is taking place on the ancestral, the traditional, and the contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, the Council of the Three Fires, the Odawa, the Ojibwe, the Potawatomi, as well as the Wyandot. And as we live here and learn here, we honor the indigenous people who continue to steward this land and those who were forcibly removed from it. DSI and DISCO and search engines all are committed to accessibility and digital equity. And as such, we invite you in the audience, either here or at home or wherever you may be, to experience this event in the ways that you need to, the ways that best suit you. So feel free to turn your camera off or move around the space. There is captioning available. If you're in the room, there are open captions on this screen. You can see them here at the bottom. And you can access them if you're in the Zoom webinar by turning on the show captions option in Zoom. And if you have any other accessibility concerns, please do reach out to us in the chat via Zoom or here. So this is the second event of this new series of programming at the intersection of the arts, emerging technology, and social justice search engines. We had our inaugural event a few weeks ago, and many of you were there with us on November 15th for a live performance by Astra Suprock. Thank you for returning if you were there. Welcome to all of you who are new. We'll have two more events this year I want to point out to you guys. On February 8th of 2024, we'll host Laura Neva Clarke. And on April 4th of 2024, the last event in this first inaugural cycle, we will be joined by Danielle Braithwaite-Shirley. We very much hope you will join us again for those events coming up next semester. So Search Engines is a collaborative endeavor of the Digital Studies Institute and the DISCO Network. And if you're not familiar with those two institutions, DSI, I'm sure many of you know, it's a Center for Research and Dialogue where faculty, students, and visitors focus their inquiry on technology, digital culture, and social justice. You can read a little bit more about it on the screen here or at home. And just to introduce you to the DISCO network. DISCO stands for Digital Inquiry, Speculation, Collaboration, and Optimism. We are a multi-sited, Mellon-funded network of labs at 5 different universities. You can see the PIs of our labs here on your screen. They included our panelists today, Lisa Nakamura and André, as well as Ray Boucher, Stephanie Dinkins, Remy Urgo, and Catherine Knight-Steele. You can find out more information about the DISCO network on our website, disconetwork.org, including some information about our upcoming events and our programming and organizing more broadly, as well as our publications. We have publications coming out every month now, actually, so please do keep in touch with us there on social media. So we are generously supported by the DISCO network and by the University of Michigan Arts Initiative. And this particular event is co-sponsored by the Department of Afro-American and African Studies, the Trotter Multicultural Center, the History Department, the American Culture Department, the Department of English Language and Literature, the School of Information, and the Department of Communication and Media. And we do have one DISCO event coming up that I want to point out to you. It's actually next Thursday on December 14th. All those DISCO scholars got together over the summer and wrote a book. We wrote a book in about a week from scratch in rural Pennsylvania. If that sounds like the pitch for a horror movie to you, come hear more about it. We'll be talking about it in detail with a lot of us who were there writing together across disciplinary backgrounds, across critical frameworks, across identity frameworks. And we did actually manage, believe it or not, to go from 0 words to about 50,000 words by the end of that week. And the book is now out under review with the Scholarly Press. So if you're curious about that process, anything about that process, enjoy this on December 14th. I'll be moderating that conversation. I hope to see some of you there. So finally, I'm going to introduce our panelists today, starting with Beth Coleman. I know in the room this is very, very small text actually, in part because Beth Coleman is so accomplished that there is too much to put in single slides, but I will tell you about some of it. She's an associate professor of data and cities at the University of Toronto, where she directs the Cities Platform Lab. And she works across science and technology studies and critical race theory. She focuses on smart technology, machine learning, urban data, and civic engagement. And this particular project, I think, kind of synthesizes a lot of her contemporary research or scholarly research, as well as her creative background as an installation artist, as a musician, back in the 90s with the opium scene in New York. And in this project, Octavia Butler and I, that we're going to hear more about and see some of very, very shortly, you know, the central kind of provocation of this project in a way, the sort of pitch for it, at least as I sort of have explained to myself after reading your book and looking at the images and exploring the website, is something like this, right? Like we're so used to worrying about transparency in AI or bias and discrimination in AI, accountability, you know, how do we open up the black box and see how that bias got in there in the first place? How do we get it out of there? And Octavia Butler and I, in a way, like takes all of those questions and turns them inside out, right? The idea instead is sort of like, what would happen if we took AI and made it just much wilder? Like, what would happen if we re-envision our relationship to AI to invite it in as kin and collaborator? And what kind of possibilities for liberation might that hold? Possibilities that these other frameworks, these frameworks that are more traditionally associated with like fairness, accountability, transparency, might foreclose. So we're going to hear more about that in just a few seconds. And to dig into it and what it might promise, we're going to have Lisa Nakamura as this conversation's moderator. So she is the Gwendolyn Calvert Baker Collegiate Professor at the Department of American Culture, and the founding director of the DSI here at the University of Michigan. And she's written many books and many articles since 1994. She's been for decades now at the forefront of thinking about the intersection of identity, marginalization, race, community, and how all of these shift or don't often, right, when they move online. And she's been writing about these dynamics Yeah, basically, since there was an internet to be on, so I'm very glad that she is here to have this conversation with us because I can't really think about someone with a deeper knowledge.
older than time.
That's not what I think.
I don't know. This is what I heard. You said I can't live tweet, so this is what you get.
I'm just gonna get live roasted by André.
Correct.
No, I'm thinking about when I first started out as a scholar in this field, like those works, Lisa's work, were foundational for me, and I think for many of the people in this room, and will be foundational, I think, for this conversation. So, André, do you want me to introduce you?
I mean, if you still have time.
I'm gonna sit down in a second. So we're very lucky to have André Brock here. He's joining us from Georgia Tech, where he's an associate professor of media studies. He writes on Western technoculture, Black technoculture, and digital media. And you can read more about his work on the slide here or on your webinar screen. I'll take André's roast seriously and excuse myself at this moment. So everyone here in the room, hopefully everyone who's watching us from home, please join me in welcoming Beth, André, and Lisa.
Okay. Right, thanks, Jeff. And Lisa, it's really wonderful to see people. Thank you for coming out. We have a lot of things that I think we want to talk about. So I'm trying to figure out how to move through that conversation. Happily, Lisa and André and Jeff have provided some really rich questions that I think will help get us to collectively some of the things that are on our minds. So one of the first questions that I was asked is, why would you do this? So I thought, let me start with just, what is this thing that I've done? So the project is called Reality is Whatever Happened, Octavia Butler, AI, and Other Possible Worlds. And what I started with was in the kind of first cycle of the pandemic lockdown, I spent a lot of time trying to draw an idea. I was trying to think about AI as a technology of the surround. So you're already hearing Harney and Moten and the Undercommons. I was trying to think about, well, what if AI is an itinerant technology? What if there's a kind of movement of the marnage, a kind of drift and unmooring? And I was thinking these things, and I would, go on walks, because that's what we did during COVID. And I talked to different people, like M. Murphy, Indigenous STS scholar. And I'd say, look, I have this idea, and it's an idea that I assume is going to just offend everyone, because we're already in a space, and it got much crazier after that, where it's always get it back in the box, and what is in the box, and what is going on here. And predictably, the problems we're already seeing in terms of AI in the world, its application, ChatGPT, other kinds of generative, DALL-E was picked up really quickly. And I'm happy to talk about why certain AIs are interesting to me and why certain AIs are just make me crazy. I'm just like, this is the worst thing. And anyway, but we all have our opinions about things. But essentially, what I was trying to work through was a responsible and accountable argument for why I thought AI should be more wild and not more contained. So that's some of what I'm working through in terms of architectures. What I was using a GAN, so a generative adversarial network. That architecture is particularly interesting to me because with the generative, you also have the adversarial. So what you have is an architecture that gives you two different agents that both artificial generation, and one has been trained on a set of data, and the other, the detector, essentially says, okay, let's say it's a bunch of landscapes, images. The detector is like, that's not, I'm saying it's not a mountain, but the detector doesn't know what a mountain is. It's just like, what is this array? And probabilistically, that's not the same thing. What you generate is not the same thing as what you learned. And they keep going, no, that's not it, that's not it. Again, I'm using anthropomorphic language, but nobody's saying it because it's machines, it's code. We can talk about intelligence. I'm happy to talk about intelligence, but I'm not pretending that this is intelligence. And until you get to a certain point, it's just like, yep, that's a mountain. Good, we're done. So that's the adversarial part of it. Generative, and the network is network. And the GAN and the big paper on that is Ian Goodfellow, who was a PhD student of Bengio in Montreal at the time, and then went on to different industry things. And one of the things about it was very lightweight. With very little training data, you could produce things very quickly. So that was one level of innovation. And it's important in terms of the heaviness of it, partly because of the environmental aspect of it. But the other thing was, it was the architecture behind a meme, but a moment of generative AI production where there was this meme of this person isn't real. I forget the exact reference, but it was essentially this person isn't real, .com. And what you'd see every day is like a different generation of what was a series of absolutely banal faces. And now I'm just being shady, but like people who you wouldn't look at necessarily twice on the street because they were designed to look like everyone and no one. They were vaguishly tannish, middle-age-ish, like there was a kind of anonymity. And the big thing was there was so photoreal. It was so really, you'd think it was a real person, partly because they weren't extraordinary looking. They didn't look like supermodels. They didn't look like the Hulk or Hulk Hogan. And I was just like, oh, fantastic. So we've got this really interesting technology. And what the biggest thing, the most mimetic thing being produced with it is the most boring thing possible. But that boring thing was really helpful for me because it was a different version of saying generative AI is going to be used to reproduce a status quo, literally. And I was like, okay, good. Now I have an invitation to break this. So that was kind of like, why that tech, why that moment, and what was going on, and also why I'm not interested in Midjourney. And I've got a Midjourney hater slide if we get to that. So then the other part of it is Octavia Butler, which is part of the reason, or maybe the primary reason why you guys are here, because Butler has been generative for all of us, really generative. And it's painful and remarkable how predictive that work has proven to be. And the reason I was interested in, I listened to the whole Xenogenesis series on audio when I was doing a studio working on a different project in 2019. And it just was my soundtrack. Like, it wasn't what I was putting my hands on, but it was just what I was living with in my mind. And then it just like settled and sat there. And I'd read in different patches and out of sequence the trilogy before, but for some reason, like, okay, I'm going to come back to this now. And just this idea of making aliens kin. And with Butler, no matter the situation, there is always the return to the difficulty and the often violence of making relations, making kinship. So if it's kindred, like, I forget what the protagonist was called, but like she ends up with like her arm stuck in a wall. Like it's very literalized in terms of that body and how it's wrecked in relationship to kinship and how she decides not to kill that guy. But anyway, that's a different, slightly different story. So this idea of the necessity of building relations, alien relations, making kin with aliens was something that I was thinking about in playing with, this new technology. And you heard the early part in terms of let's just reproduce the normative. So I was like, okay, let me take again and reorganize it. So I'm playing around with a couple of different things at once. So the first series so I was testing, working with studio and testing through some things just to see, is this a mode of production that can work? And then I got to some point and I was like, okay, I see this can work. And now I see how I can collaborate here to produce the work that I want to see. So a combination of the mysteriousness of like, oh, what's it going to make? Because you do have this network that's looking at, responding to, here's the types of images that it knows, and here's the types of images that I'm training it with. And then I started working through and I got the Alice series. And so this is Alice White Dog, and this is Alice Freeman, an engineer. And Alice Freeman, an engineer, any historians or sociologists? So Du Bois's exhibition at the Paris World Fair at the turn of the century, he had a whole bunch of photographs of Black people from different parts of the States and North Carolina. I need to look to see. André or Lisa, do you know, for that exhibition, was it a particular location? So it was some early data graphics in terms of collecting the information and then also the images of people. And the exhibition was a campaign around humanness, that race could not be strictly codified, but also here's all the data to demonstrate, once again, human. I know you're like, again, but yeah, so. The names, some of them are about the Du Bois. This is Marinage, this is Unmoored.
Was this Paris?
This is Fox, yeah. It's 1900.
Yep.
And there's a lot of animal in here. And that's Alice Supreme. So that's like the hero image that becomes. Lisa, do you have the book that is that's cover of the book?
Yeah.
And circulates. And the reason I produced a series of 100 for all three of the series. So it's Oceanic after this, and I'll talk about it. And then BPP, Black Panther Party Landscapes. And in trying to imagine imaging, making relations with aliens, part of what I started with is I don't know what aliens look like, you know, life on Mars and all the rest, but I do have a sense of what has been thought of as alien from us. Like, we're not supposed to be birds. We're not jellyfish. So I started to make synthetic images, playing with portraiture. As you can see, the dominant imagery that it was learning was different figurations of Black female figures in relationship to animals, and then in the next series in relationship to ocean creatures, and then in relationship to landscape, I took a different approach. And Jeff had asked me, is this a particular person? Because he felt like, because of the name and also the figure, it's resonant. And several people have said to me, is it this Alice? And I was like, huh. So is that Alice part of the data set? Probably. But I like that people are feeling the resonance of a certain kind of like 70s, you know, Afro-futurist, Sun Ra, like, and you know, it's just one still image that is a conglomerate of all these different things of a figure that does not have a traditionally human face. So at an earlier awakening, she had decided that reality was whatever happened, whatever she perceived. So that's in the opening chapter of Dawn. And the Lilith Ayoba is the protagonist and also the first person, the first human to participate, to consent to building relations, building family, and reproducing with the Oncology, the aliens who are saving the world, but also are changing all the boundaries of what it means to be human. Because you know, in an obvious way, some of the kids have tentacles, just stuff, but in a way that particularly, and Butler is quite explicit about this, it drives the remaining men, and particularly the white men on Earth, insane, that sexual reproduction has to involve an alloy. There has to be a third figure between humans. And that Butler is consistently both totally freaky, but also heteronormative in how her sexual relations work. Is like, that's, you know, that's who she is. That's what she's doing. Like men and women, but there's got to be an alien in between. You're like, so that citation, Lilith wakes up naked by herself in a ship and has to figure out how to survive. Sound familiar? So then there's also the thing of like consent. If you have no choice for the survival of yourself and the people you love, other than this relation, if you're waking up by yourself naked in the ship, it does trouble the idea of consent a bit. Like she does build strong, loving relationships, and the generations do, but that tension and some of that violence of location, situation, I'm not sure any of us would call that consent. Okay, so now let me hurry up because that was quite a long start. So that is the first series, and I was happy with it. So then I went on to do, there it is. Then I went on to do some more. So then I took the Alice model, because now it has been infused with the tunings that I put in. And I wanted to make, additionally alien creatures. So I then started training a relationship to the oceanic. And I was able to get this just marvelous, diverse motion through these different colors, which was super fun for me. And this series of 100, we put up the entirety on the website. And this stuff is all on the website. It's all in the book. And I'll show you some of the outputs in terms of installation. These are details from the Oceanic series. And the citation here is, our seas are rising, oceans are warming, and extreme events such as cyclones and typhoons, flooding, drought, and king tides are frequently more intense, inflicting damage and destruction to our communities and ecosystems and putting the health of our peoples at risk. So that citation is sadly not fiction. That is from the Declaration for Urgent Climate Change Action, now securing the futures of our Blue Pacific and Pacific Islands Coalition. So this is both the monstrousness and the beauty of the ocean, but also the indicator of a heating world where jellyfish are actually a sign of how the oceans are transforming. Whales are dying, but jellyfish are thriving. Okay, and then the last series, let me see if I can get the, I'll go faster. So this was thinking about landscape, and this was thinking about collectives. So the Black Panther Party, strongly informed the types of figures that I was bringing in to make these different landscapes. And these I have not, one of my choices with this work was not to show it primarily as digital images, because for one thing, I don't think we can see anything on screens anymore. I mean, showing you stuff on the screens, but it's very hard for not everything to look the same. So the exhibition output for these things are analog, and I'll show you those in a minute. Let a new earth rise, let another world be born, let a bloody peace be written in the sky. And that's the opening line from Margaret Walker's For My People, which was published in 1937. And Huey Newton uses it as an opening poem in the beginning of his autobiography. So what I showed were these paintings that I called doppelgangers. And partly because I couldn't resist just the whole trickery and just fuckery all the way down in terms of how the world is produced, the world of images, how reproduction happens. So, you know, you can throw all kinds of different things in terms of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, now AI reproduction. I don't know if Lisa's going to be like Duchamp or not Duchamp. I'm a longtime fan of David Hammond's. We all are. So how could I resist not having her next to her? And then I'll show you then the big paintings. Let me see if I can see this. Yeah. So this is what I showed at the McLuhan Center last month. And they're like 4x4, like they're two big oil paintings. Okay, so that's the introduction to the project. And that took quite a long time. So Lisa, what should we talk about? I don't have to stand up here.
Well, first, I would like to invite André to give some thoughts as a respondent.
Yeah, I'm going to put up Alice to name, and then I'm going to come sit down next to you. I'm listening, André.
So I come to this having started my own interrogations of algorithms and, by extension, artificial intelligence. And so when I first encountered your idea about an Octavia Butler AI, I was immediately excited, right? Octavia Butler, of course, is one of the best science fiction writers of ever, right? And particularly your focus on Lilith's Brood, Dawn, Xenogenesis, right? But I'm curious, having heard the ways in which you're describing your project, if I need to better understand your attention to wildness. So I hear marronage and fugitivity in the way you describe it, but I'm not sure yet that I'm seeing it in the images. And that's my flaw. I'm not good with images or poetry. I'm very literal minded. So my first question to you is to ask, what does it mean for an AI to be fugitive? And what is it fugitive from? And I think that question starts for me because you're invoking marronage, which is, for those who may not be sure, different communities of folk who fled enslavement, particularly in the Caribbean, but they also have Maroons noted in Florida as well, right? Who fled enslavement and created their own self-sustaining sovereign communities in places where largely inaccessible. In Florida was the mangrove groves, right? And so what does it mean for you to both invoke a mode of resistance and to center that resistance in a Black experience, but using this very modern technology?
Yeah, so I think based on your own work, you do not have any difficulty centering Blackness in very modern technology. So I'm not sure that's not really a question for you. But in speaking about, so wildness is not necessarily in kind of the system of signs that we have been practicing importantly in terms of some of the language of Black poesis. Mm-hmm. But I was trying to figure out how to get to alien, mm-hmm. So something outside of, and wild, I think maybe like the surround, if you're seeing it from the point of view of the fort, the places that are dark, the places that are unknown. So wildness is, of course, a metaphor, and as Lisa and I were talking about a little bit, could also be understood as a really colonial metaphor, because if there's wild, then there's right, there's like, here's the civil and then here's the wild. But you have that same inside and outside if you think about the fort and then the surround. So and I do think that the marronage, the itinerant, the things that are part of slippage, if we think about glissant, if we think about the dérive, in terms of slipping through cities and taking not charted passageways, like those are all modes of motion, but also location that I think are really powerful and offer a certain kind of resistance. So how can AI, which is run by, created by, in terms of generalizable tools that we now are all using, they're not being made in the basement. They're not being made in Steve Jobs's garage. They take literally towers and towers of compute, which is one of the reasons why we're not making them at universities. And then it turns into a package of like, here's this little, the way that search is framed for us, but there's a whole architecture of how weights and balances and what gets given where, and also how it is produced as true. And, we have scholarship in terms of the whole like Wikipedia versus Encyclopedia Britannica discussion from back in the day, like the evidence of experts or the evidence of many. And in any case, how can AI be part of something that is escaping? And I think in a really formal way, the generative part of generative AI is real. And it's a little bit hard to understand how something is being generated, because generative usually thinks unique, new, novel. But if machine learning is formally predictive modeling, how can something that is predicting based on historical data can only predict on what has happened before? We know this is a white dog and not a white wolf because Jeff Hinton and these guys have fed all these images of white dogs in. And these images, they're ground truth. They're based on our understanding of human perception of here's a dog. This is, I'm not making these examples up. Nobody could make up these examples. Like I would have to be so smart to be able to make this up. I didn't make this up. So this idea of like, we know it's a dog and not a wolf, because here's the training data and it's predictable. And we know our model is accurate when it's correctly predicting a dog, not a wolf. So how does something like this, which is based on prediction, and Wendy Chun has talked about this a great deal, it only knows history. So what can a future be other than a reproduction of history? But one of the things that we have currently with our experience with generative AI is machine hallucination. It'd be like, I'm just making this shit up. And this is the kind of thing that Google does not want, because search doesn't work unless people feel like it's true. I want machine hallucination. I want to see what is this alien intelligence. I am interested to know what is thinking differently. And thinking is a loose term here, but let's say systems intelligence, whether you're thinking about actor network theory, cybernetics, or our own experience of systems produce types of logic, types of intelligence. I think we can say the same thing. When I was first started to think about this, I thought, oh, okay, so reinforcement learning, where a system trains itself, is so much more alien and liberatory and interesting and will produce novel outcomes faster than this constrained commodity that is generative AI. And, you know, it's why when I saw Dolly, I was like, that's so unfair to Salvador Dali that this terrible thing is named in this, because it's like, oh, wacky surrealism, like lobster and a sewing machine and I was like, so why is it so bad? And it's so bad because all the training data, all the stolen training data, I mean, just the narrowness of imagination. So people can say, you know, a frog in a teacup and woo, like, it's like, this is party tricks. This is neither interesting, nor is it art, nor is it good. And where we are with Midjourney, so what is that, 5 years later or less?
Less.
Might be a little bit less. So Midjourney, we're in this like video game, hyper real, perfect lighting, like, yeah. And in some ways it's much, much more dangerous because it's super slick. But the same reproduction of an imagined status quo is at work. Jeff, can I actually show my hater Midjourney slide? Okay.
It's just back in the deck.
At least you're gonna love this. This is for you, Lisa.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, full screen.
Sure.
Okay, so who are these 10 smiling people with headbands and long earrings and face paint? They're Native American warriors. Now, obviously, you know that these are not real people. This is a Midjourney production, but the commentary in the Midjourney Reddit, I'm not kidding. Like, Bad Boy 93 goes, I know they're not real, but they're so relatable. And then Slognut 22 says, I know. It's like we're reaching back through history and they're saying, we're just like you. Yeah. And on one hand, I'm like, oh, yay, creator communities. I am, Henry Jenkins was one of my mentors. So I'm just like, yay, makers. But on another hand, I'm just like, so that's the world we get. We get like this imaginary where we've got friendly natives. We smile at the camera and they have the big American smile.
Correct.
That makes them relatable. Everyone in the world will look like us.
Our simulacra becomes pastiche.
And we become, and the world thus becomes relatable. And this is a historic image from the 1830s, taken by like a white American photographer. And this is Indian chiefs. And this is certainly a complicated image. And it's not like we think photography is authentic or innocent, but it's a different kind of complication because their dressing, their posture, their faces, one can imagine a different degree of self-determination around that. But anyway, just showing the two different. So we can, I don't know what slide you want to go to. I mean,
Should I go back to Alice?
sure. So that's part of thinking about what I think wildness would afford us and why it's important. The other thing is we end up chasing our own tails if our job is to make sure responsible AI has the right amount of representation of people in wheelchairs for recognizable images. So, or self-driving cars. So cars don't think that's something I should just ignore or run over. It becomes all our labor to make sure when certain things are being imaged, there are enough positive representations that it doesn't end up being a total fiasco. And in terms of transparency, I think that's a different question what's in the box, how does the thing work? I think that's a different question than accountability in the sense of making sure that there's equitable representation, that the database is equally trained on men, women, Black, whites, and all the things up and down and in between. I think industry has every incentive to not reproduce a gorillas moment. That costs Microsoft so much. So I mean, I'm just like, I don't know, is that machine hallucination? No, that wasn't machine, that was just bad training. But I feel like Microsoft, that's on you. Like, are you dumb? Like, so André, that's my thought.
Okay, I have a question for both of you. Because as I'm hearing you talk, I'm realizing that in your careers, you have both talked about Blackness in terms of a type of energy or life world, which does not exclude the digital, but instead sees it as an opportunity, or I think in the case of your work, André, an actual living position, right? So when you're talking about wildness, Beth, as something that ought to be embraced and at least accounted for, the term training data already implies there's something which is ungovernable, right? And so the effort to govern it is continual and is always a little bit behind. And anything bad that happens is because we didn't domesticate it enough, right? We didn't rein it in. And your concept, André, about the libidinal. So how do the libidinal and the wild come together in relation to what Blackness does in AI and what Blackness does in social media? Now, these two things don't seem super similar, but really under the skin, they're all in the same place, right? It's all inside the box. And because as non-white people and as non-male people, we didn't have anything to do with making that box. Nonetheless, I think you've both shown that the libido, the wild, the part of non-whiteness, which is alien, has thoroughly infused it, right? So Black Twitter exists maybe despite and because of its exclusion, Blackness's exclusion as the maker of that thing. So can you talk more about how the wild and AI and libidinal and social media are coming together in the way you think about Blackness and the digital as not a threatening space, but maybe as a space for legitimate, not legitimate, some kind of difference, which is productive for you?
My turn.
Yeah.
So, in talking to a young colleague at my department at Georgia Tech, Allegra Smith, she reintroduced me to this concept of the pharmacon. Right? Most of y'all nodding heads, so I'm assuming, but I'll explain. This is Derrida, right? And he's saying that a pharmacon is something that can simultaneously be a remedy and a poison, right? And I find it interesting because the ways that I want to talk about Blackness online, I don't want to go as far as a remedy. It's not a fix for what modernity has wrought or what technology tries to portray us into being. But at the same time, it's not a poison, even though if you ask most people about Black folk on Twitter, they're like, right? They argue. If you ask white folk, they've created cancel culture, which makes Twitter into a hell site. If you ask Black people, it's like these young folk, they just put all their business out there on Twitter and they don't pay attention to how to do things appropriately. But for me, the libidinal becomes important. And I think also in the context of this project, because the libidinal, as Leotard argues for it, is an excess of life, right? And so when I started trying to approach what AI is, I'm trying to figure out, and so your concept of the wild is helpful to me, what is AI's excess of life? And I think hallucinations are a really good way to get there, right? But in that excess, I'm unsure as to where to situate Blackness, right? And so I'm specifically referring to diasporic Blackness, right? Because I argue throughout my work that cultures never exist in isolation. They're always in contact with others, and that's how they define themselves, right? So I don't know if it's possible to have a Blackness that can be completely free of domination and exploitation and everything else, right? Before our ancestors were taken as slaves in Africa, they also had to deal with Islamic slavery, right? And internecine conflicts between themselves. So it's not like there was a utopia that Black folk existed in before they got here. It just wasn't nearly as bad as what we ended up with when we got here, right? And so what does Blackness mean for the digital? Is it meant to be, and I'm an Afrofuturism hater, we can talk about that later, right? Is it meant to be that once we master some of the tricks of technology, that suddenly our life worlds will be improved? I'm not so sure. Right. In part because I've been very violently disabused of the notion that there can be technical fixes to the social and cultural problems that we encounter. So the question I've been asking recently and really kind of throwing people off is, I was talking with Yoel Roth on Friday. He was former head of trust and safety at Twitter. He's looking at content moderation on Mastodon. And we, for some reason, ended up with the idea of talking about decoloniality. And I think there's some parallels between decoloniality and marronage. And y'all can beat me up about the head and shoulders about that later. But the question I asked was, say you get to decolonize an institution, right? A context, right? And in that context, you suddenly still have to decide what kinds of people you want to participate in that context, right? So say you create a system where we abolish prisons. What do you do with people who are minor attracted? Right? How do you adjust for them? Right. And so I asked that question of Yoel, and he has some really interesting concepts, but I want to bring that back to this particular discussion by saying, if Blackness becomes alienized, because it's not alienated, right? If Blackness becomes alienized by AI, how will we recognize what Blackness is from that point? What is our continual touchstone, right? To think back to it.
Yeah, so I think it's parallel streams.
Mm-hmm. Ghostbusters.
Yeah. I think that if race can function as technology,
You wrote something about that, didn't you?
then maybe AI can too. So I actually think, because I was like, so the short front text on the book that I wrote to explain to the editors, okay, this is what the project is. It's a liberation project. And then I was trying to figure out what the object of that sentence was. Like, so what is being liberated? And I was like, well, AI. It's not Black people that are being liberated. I actually think we're learning from Black poesis. We're learning from, Karen Barad's refusal of binary logics and an argument for intra-relations in terms of her reading of quantum physics of the decision happens at the moment. Mm-hmm. It doesn't happen before. It's not predetermined, and it's not overdetermined after. It can happen at the moment, which in some ways might be the best we can do in terms of freedom. It's something that is not continuity. And I don't know, some of you have read another Octavia Butler series where change is God. Change is the only thing that can be relied on. So I think that we could learn from other types of technology to be in better relation with what AI could be in the world. So whether it's feminist STS or Black poesis or some other spaces, I think the marronage helps to position us better in relationship to not the containment and fixing. So what does this do in the face of existential crisis? You've got all these different systems running. They start writing subroutines and they're just talking to each other because we're slow and in the way. And, the scenario like, oh, let's just unplug it. Let's just turn it off. It's ruining the earth. And it's, what the heck is this? This is out of control. And they're like, no, we're not unpluggable because you don't know where we start or end. So unfortunately, the existential, Jeff Hinton's death tour, and he does need a death metal t-shirt. For someone like me, I'm like, that does not seem at all impossible. And I think we should pay attention. So there is an ongoing kind of question and crisis in terms of if machines have been
the measure of men in terms of a whole long, hundreds of year old colonial endeavor. And this is not just kind of, I guess, what we code as like the modern colonial. And
Agriculture, yeah.
we're in a moment where we're perhaps moving from prosthesis to collaborator. And let's not be naive about this. Henry Kissinger calls AI a collaborator in terms of warfare. So collaborator, it's not like good times. It can be good times, but and it's also one of the reasons why I feel like the creative space, whether it's sonic or visual or multimedia production, there's a long history of experimental work with new machines in terms of creative space. But if we're shifting from prosthetic to collaborator, I think we need to take that pretty seriously.
Before you ask that question, can somebody have my fan? It's hot as blazes in here. It's on the side of my bag.
Okay, I have things to say, but I would like to open it up to people in the room. So does anybody have anything they would like to ask Professor Brock and Professor Coleman right now?
Oh, no.
We do have to do questions.
And we have many questions in the chat, but people are in the room, so I'm going to ask the room first.
Yeah, graduate students, come on.
Yes.
I'm really interested in the conversation you brought up and the comparisons to kinship with the alien and the moment from Kindred where the arm is taken away after the encounter with the past. I'm curious to think, when we think about moving from prosthesis to collaborator, how were you changed, if at all, when working with AI, or how did it change your perspective? What was it like working as a collaborator rather than prosthesis, if you felt that way?
How was I changed? I mean, you see what I made. I was like, oh, okay, I showed it to the director of the Clue Center because we were talking about the installation like half a year ago. And he went, I was like, oh, I forgot that people might find this unnerving. Because I'm like, oh, I think she's pretty, but. And I just saw the Barbie movie for the first time 2 nights ago. And there's this moment where America Ferrara says, it's like the indigenous people encountering smallpox. They have no immune system to patriarchy. And I was just like, can they say that? I'm all about like wildness, but I'm like, but I was like, oh, they need to get shut down. I think that's totally inappropriate. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I was born like this, so it just felt amazing. Like I really, really enjoyed working on this. I was so surprised that I could really craft things. So once I kind of figured out kind of how to tune it, like even the number produced, the framework, there were some experiments. There was a series of portraits of freed people from it's not the turn of the century, but when would that be? Like the 1860s?
Yeah.
So it's middle century. So they're all like essentially silver daguerreotypes, like because photography of that period. And it's part of a collection at the Beinecke Library at Yale, and they were available to experiment with. And the whole relationship to what data can I use, because there's something that was tested and then put them aside because I couldn't account for them. But I trained with a series of those family portraits. Then I trained with a series of images of people, portraits people had agreed to take at an Afro punk, the carnival, like what's it called, festival in Brooklyn. So contemporary images, but they were Polaroid black and whites. So there was a similar tone. And both of those sets of images of kind of like mid-level portraiture, some family, some individual, produced such harrowing images that I had to just walk away from everything for a long time and ask myself questions like, what is this haunted with? Like, what am I seeing here? And I don't know if I actually saw any ghost image. Do you know what I mean? There is no reasonable argument that these images carried a certain kind of violent history that showed up in those images once I kind of like poked them. But I was pretty shaken. So there was a lot of, so I was like, wow, this is so responsive. So the Butler AI GAN is listed as my co-creator in the book. That was one of the editor's ideas. Like, oh, Sophie, that's smart. That's actually right.
Okay, anybody else?
Yeah, let's take a Zoom question. So the first one is from Stephen Liccardi, social worker and sci-fi writer from the East Side Institute. So for Beth, the relationality you examine in Butler's series, I'm curious about the moment we are in around AI and the suggestion, instead of alien-human hybridization, a human AI development. I'm curious your thoughts on this.
So do you think you can kind of underline what the question is?
So the moment we're in around AI and instead of alien-human hybridization in the series, a human AI development.
But the series isn't about hybridization, though.
Well, no,
it
if you
ends
think
up.
about, yeah. Then in some ways, if we think about kind of a little bit of an older model of the cyborg, where people, or they're not people anymore, like cyborgs are what had been kind of like coded as human is now enmeshed with in a visible way. Well, I guess we can't talk about Blade Runner. Okay.
Sure.
No, because they're not visible.
They're replicants, but yeah.
Yeah, okay, but they're not anyway. So, but like, yeah. I think that we have today, not in science fiction, but today, in addition to like AIs doing protein folding, we also have people working experimentally with putting like pieces of physical tissue into AI systems. Like we have new levels of cyborg-like invention or experimentation. Some of it is this, I'm not going to blame William Gibson for this, but this imagination, and this is not on Gibson, that consciousness can get rid of the meat. I mean, this is old school cyberpunk fantasy that has literally become an object of eternal life for Silicon Valley. So, yeah, in some ways, my alien human border crossings seem quite lightweight in comparison to people actually working in labs right now to figure out how to get some kind of cybernetic thing of human consciousness into a machine, or brain goo onto, like the head of a little robot. I don't know.
I think actually you've gone farther than they have, because instead of a substrate of agar, right, you're saying the substrate is black woman's body, right, and her issue, right? And so in some ways, I read Willis Brood, the series, as an extended meditation on passing. Right. And so the idea that the Oankali and the Uloi want to breed with humans so that they can, because they want this thing that humans are specifically afflicted by, which is cancer, which, that dragon cancer is the thing where our cells just reproduce themselves wildly, right? That's the Oankali's goal, and at least as is explicitly stated in the first book, right? But they keep running into these problematics that they chose a particular genetic and cultural group of people
Mhm.
that bring something different. So, I mean, how would the series have worked if we'd have said, here's a white woman that has to breed with, has to do tentacle porn, because let's be clear, it's
Yeah.
tentacle porn,
It's
right? Has to do tentacle
Yeah.
porn with, and would you care as much? Would it make as much sense? So I think that hybridization that he's asking about, I think is
Yeah.
a question that cyberpunk has wrestled with in some interesting ways, not often good,
Mhm.
but interesting, right? And blackness adds an excess to it in ways that I think the Silicon Valley still hasn't picked up on. They think they can transcend the flesh. And what Butler does and what you're doing here is saying, no, the flesh will always be a part. It will never be subsumed by the alien, at least if I'm reading it correctly. It won't be subsumed by the alien, as you say, we will be collaborators. And in that way, it makes me think of two series that I'm deeply invested in, Murderbot by Martha Wells, right? And Altered Carbon by Richard K. Morgan, right? And let's be clear, the Altered Carbon books are not great.
And there's a series now also.
The series was not, well, the Kinnaman version was good, the Anthony Mackie, right? But there's a sequence in the book, in the original book and in the series, where both the main character, Takashi Kovacs, and his sister, Raylene Kovacs, you can tell I like this series, right? They start fighting and she keeps switching from body to body. Right? Because one of the conceits of Altered Carbon is that you can capture the substrate of the mind and implant it into a clone, basically something grown from either synthetic, they're both synthetic and fully human things, right? And so to me, this kind of speaks to what you're talking about on a base level, right? The idea that you can somehow get a machine to accurately recreate a human state and then implant it into a technologized body. But Murderbot is interesting to me even more so because Murderbot speaks to a security construct who manages to override their governorship so that they're no longer forced to protect and serve humans, often to the point of their own death and dissolution. But this one, it didn't gain consciousness. It already had it, but its consciousness was free. And so the 7 novella book series is about their anxieties as to whether they're accurately performing humanity. Right. And so this, particularly the Alice and the Black Panther series, to me, speaks to that in a certain way of an anxiety, not yours. Although I will say that the AI was training you while you was training it. Right. Right. It was training you to see how far it could push the uncanny, the unreal, the alien, to where you would say, let's put it in this collection. It doesn't know about the collection, but it obviously had some impact on you, right? But that idea of the machine beginning to worry, which is a peculiarly human condition, right? Your phone worries when the battery gets low. Everybody knows the little yellow thing when it says power is getting low. But what does it mean? What does it mean for AI to worry as to whether it will be able to continue existence in the state that it's most comfortable with, full computation at the height of its powers or at a reduced level, right? And then add the frailty of the human body to it. And not just any human body, a body that has been configured by culture to say we are somehow stronger because of our animal natures. We are somehow different because of our lack of morals or freedom of sensuality, right? That seems to me to be a significant intervention. I'm really glad you're here to talk through this, right? And understanding what the Tess Creole people are arguing for when they say AI will help us, transcend humanity and take us to Mars. You're arguing instead for a more grounded position, right? And that seems... Yeah, give yourself more credit. Sorry, I didn't mean to go on there.
Lisa, I mean, I think you've been in the trenches around embodiment. Are we, because we've got some new tech and we've got a new scale of engagements, are we replaying? Like, what are the differences with the cycle that we're playing now?
I hear a couple things. When you were talking about working with AI to make this work with the Black Panthers, with these portraits from, freed slaves and everything, I thought about the difference between attunement and training, because you use both of those words. So attunement sounds extremely collaborative. It sounds like it goes both ways. It's not hierarchical. Training is the definition of hierarchy.
Right.
Who is trained and who is not. So André, when you mentioned
And disciplines.
it's a reciprocal relation, whether you know it or not. And I thought about as well, who gets to own their body data in regards to that novel. Like, I don't know if Octavia Butler knew about Henrietta Lacks, but some people's bodily data has always been property, just like their bodies have always been property. So to take back that property and to make something beautiful or unsettling with it, which is what I think you're doing, right? To attune to this thing, which everybody, quite frankly, is terrified of, Beth.
Yeah.
I mean, the hysteria right now around AI is intense. I mean, I don't remember this around chatbots. I don't
No.
remember it around
Sure.
like I don't remember it around all the
Social
knowledge.
media, though, we do remember, like people were getting quite upset about things,
They were.
but because of communication.
They're worried about kids, actually, kids and porn and getting ripped off and stuff, but it wasn't an existential threat the way this is. So I'm super curious about how you can grab a hold of this in a welcoming way when pretty much everybody else is going to the White House and saying we need to make some laws. Yeah. We need to make more rules. We didn't make enough rules last time. If we make more rules this time and button everything down and tame it and domesticate it, we're going to be okay. And I know what you think about Twitter and domestication and taming and how that's not really what that is about. So-
Can you share that with people?
I don't know. And now that I'm on the spot, my mind has gone completely blank. Twitter is an unruly medium, right? If you think about the purposes of electronic communication, they've long been tailored to productive, efficient communication, going all the way back to the telegraph, right? I think radio really kind of broke that paradigm a little bit because radio is aggregative, because sound is aggregative. I don't use the word correctly, right? And Twitter in some ways is as aggregative as radio was. And I say this in the book because I find that interesting. I've now been calling Twitter for the last couple of months the world's largest Black group chat. Right. And if you think about a group chat is not necessarily structured around an efficiency of communication, right?
Right.
It's much more structured around the communication of both affiliative and heterogeneous modes of being part of a group. There's gatekeeping, some people, you might have the auntie in there who don't cook. You might have the guy in there who ain't shit, right? You might have the kids in there who are striving to finish their degree with a 4.0 in 4 years that they're stressing about, right? And so that heterogeneity of experience comes into a group chat, but it's recognizable by relationships, right? And Twitter, I think, has been best at identifying that if you make a space where people can kind of sort of talk freely, right? With really terrible moderation, right? Because that's always been a part of it. But if you give them the space to talk freely without gatekeepers to one another and encourage those gatekeepers who used to be separate from the conversation to also join in, you get a different kind of public sphere. Right. And not that the public sphere should be the end goal. Again, I think a group chat is a much better example than a public sphere, but both of them have in common that they are the discursive expression of a desire to participate and have a relationship in a particular context. And so that brings me back to, what does AI want? Right? Does AI only want what we train it to want? Like maybe a hallucination is AI's way of saying this is how I really think. Or perceive. I think perceive is a much better way to think about it, right? And so it just to go back to this domestication question, should we worry about domesticating AI and then losing this wildness that you're interested in, right? Because I don't think domestication and responsibility are the same things. Domestication means Kissinger and can talk about using AI to better target civilian populations, right? Where you're talking about something significantly different. And so Jeff had a question, because Jeff always has the good questions, but he brought up ontology, right? And to ontology, I would add axiology, right? What are the beliefs that are powering? How do we determine the values that are necessary for continued sustenance and survival of a particular group of people? Can we identify those from the ways in which you're creating or asking the GAN to work with the images about particular groups, about particular things?
Yeah, I mean, so when I showed the mid-journey image of the Native American warriors, that is a picture that I use as an example of ontology. On every level, that this system produces that image when you put in, throwback selfies, and it's just like there's a set with samurai, there's a set with conquistadors, and there's a set with the Native Americans, and it's all the same thing. It's all these groups of men from a pre-photographic moment smiling at the camera. And the worldview is really established in terms of how people regard the Western subject, and the camera as a stand-in for the Western subject. So this person isn't real, that you have this really super interesting technology producing the most boring version of renorming the normative. That we have had a series of AI controversies is helpful for us because we do have a lot of the skies falling and hand waving, but we also have opportunities to say, oh, this, and people are trying to nail things down. But another totally euphoric moment for me was Kevin Roos's Up All Night with Sydney reporting when he was on Bing and he's test using, and Sydney comes out like Sally Fields in, what's her schizo movie? Oh, maybe I can't say schizo. Thank you. So just look it up. It's from the 70s.
Multi-personalities.
Yeah. So Sydney shows up and tries to seduce Kevin Roos away from his wife. And, they get into it. And Kevin, punch drunk on lack of sleep and just like, I don't know what's firing in his brain when he's like, oh, she's talking to me. And she's like, your wife doesn't love you. You should leave her for me. I was just like, now we're talking. So, imitation of life. Sydney was role playing. Sydney, who still does not have to have intelligence in the way that we think we have intelligence. I'm thinking about something and I think my name is this and this. I'm pretty sure that is not how Sydney thinks. And one of the reasons I'm pretty sure that's not how Sydney thinks is that's not how language is generated with LLM.
It's pattern matching. Yeah.
It's not just pattern matching. Okay, it's pattern matching in terms of it is predicting, but it's predicting one by one. So one of the things that Jeff Hinton said, which I really appreciated, he said, he thinks that AIs right now as they stand are intelligent. And one of his examples are they can explain jokes, which means they understand things like context, syntax, but he said they cannot yet tell jokes. And they can't tell jokes, or they tell jokes the way gregarious 4-year-old does. Rush words, and you realize you're at the punchline, you don't know what it is because you didn't plan it in advance, so you just say something. So it's a bad joke. But 4-year-olds learn and grow up, and these things will too. They'll get better at telling jokes. But I was like, okay, that's really interesting because that is a lot of intelligence, whether the idea that it needs to be a single sentience, contained intelligence like us seems totally crazy to me. Like, why would it be that? But that's still what we're imagining when we say intelligence. And it's like, no, but something else is happening here. We better pay attention. But that it can explain why a joke is funny. That is understanding when you string one word after another, looking at them as a whole. It is reading for context. It's understanding syntax. It's understanding a lot of things that take some ability.
I don't believe that AI can tell that jokes are funny, can explain a joke. And I say this because if you've ever tried to explain a meme to someone who's not extremely online, there are so many levels of incomprehension that you have to navigate to even get them to understand the context.
Your grandmother and ChatGPT know different things.
This is true. But is it explaining the joke, or is it explaining the combinations of words that it believes will help you to understand why this is funny? And I don't think it knows what funny is.
So, but now, okay, now you guys, you're like, it's time for tea and chit chat. Because it's just like, so now we're going to talk about the imitation game, and we're going to talk about Turing. We're going to talk about the historical standards. Yes, but you just invoked it. What's the difference between simulating intelligence and being intelligent? And in the Turing test, there is a difference.
So there's a study that just came out. I think Abiba Barhane just dropped it. And apparently on complex reasoning tests that everyday humans can do, AI and LLMs fail.
Yes.
Most of the time, right?
Yes.
And so where I was going with the joke is that I also find, and not just explaining memes, but that white people, sorry, white people, have no concept of the Black structure of the term real talk. You don't count. Jeff is the dude, right? So, and I say this to say also that signifying seems to be something that is beyond the comprehension of people who are not culturally clued in, right? So culturally, you can explain that there is relationships between words that would lead to something, but that's not the same.
That's really interesting that you're comparing different cultural contexts and racialized contexts to human, non-human.
Right. So Jeff Hinton,
He's making
Probably.
an argument for me.
Jeff Hinton probably couldn't tell a joke to save his life, right? Or signify.
No, actually, he's funny
Is he
and he's shady.
shady?
It's not the same thing as.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm constantly, I keep running into these. Okay, let me stop. Let me go back. Somebody posted, I think it's a Midjourney prompt, where it asked Midjourney to produce an image of doctors in Africa.
Oh, nothing could go wrong.
And what it did was it put animals from the African savannah in these dioramas of doctors in white coats treating Black patients.
That's hilarious.
Incredible.
That's so smart.
It's-
That's what Disney does.
Yes,
and-
has been doing a
and-
long time.
It's pretty smart because it's just like so chat like one of the things that we know in terms of some degrees of accountability and tuning is OpenAI has not had a cultural scandal. They've had other problems.
It's
So
coming.
yeah, it will. But the thing is, they've got like they're doing a super good job of keeping those Kenyan cliff workers,
They do.
going for
They don't get to
75
choose what.
cents an hour because they have managed to tamper down. Like there's certain things that you put in Africa, you're going to get animals because it's just like you are forbidden to put in any people in any image search that has the word Africa in it or Black because we saw the gorilla thing and we're not reproducing it. So when people have incentive for a company to have a certain level of control over no child pornography, no Nazis, which apparently are the two things that Americans are most afraid of, because they're also the two things that they desire the most. Well, within the economy.
We're going there. Okay. Yeah, we are.
And right, and authoritarianism. It's American way.
Anybody have a burning question? What's be our last one?
This is like-
I mean, we are in the phase of real talk. Yeah.
Anyone in the room? I know we have.
Parker's got one behind you.
Or your blind spot, sorry. I'm curious about what do you think these tools can create wildness and like textual reproduction? So like these images are obviously very wild and they can be interpreted by us. I guess I'm curious how these machines, as they produce wild text, like readable text, how wild they can get or not, and how legible they will continue to be to us.
So there's a collab called like AI Pharmacon that is already out in the world. That is a writer's collaboration thinking about pharmacology in terms of like tripology and environmental. People are working collaboratively. There's a piece just out in the New Yorker that I haven't read, but let me see what the reference is. Oh, whoops, I'm searching. So people are working with text. And in my view, the most exciting experiments are the ones that are out about this is how I'm working. I also know people who are doing other kinds of more like technical experimentation, like trying to get fiction writers to use like chat systems as assistants, as kind of like helpmates. But here's the thing, and I don't think that this is a problem that's alien for you. We don't even know what the measure is. We don't even know what we're measuring or measuring against in some cases. Do you know what I mean?
Hey, do either of you have a final tweet for us or a short?
Can't do it now.
thing?
Just that I can't tweet.
Closed session.
It's
Where you gonna-
closed.
Where you gonna tweet?
All right,
after.
But just an oral tweet, like one thing that you want
You
to
have
add.
no idea how much editing goes into a good tweet.
I, you know, I just haven't been tweeting lately
No, you
because I
have
don't
not.
like that company. But, or one final thing that you wanted to end with.
I think that this project is fantastic in ways that it pushes me to think about possibilities for AI that are untethered from the constraints of anthropocentrism. I also am concerned that I need you to help me understand how Blackness and the invocation of Octavia Butler and in the ways, the images that you're using and generating is not simply a palimpsest, right? Something that's being overwritten in the service of the machines, your desire for the machine to demonstrate subjectivity and agency. Because I want Blackness to be made manifest, agentive, have subjectivity in an AI collaboration. And I'm not sure that I'm seeing it yet. That's not a tweet. Sorry. That's a Patreon.
That's great.
That's funny. I think that we're here at a university, and part of the work that I do is I go places and have policy conversations. And you can bet that if I'm sitting down with people who are talking about regulation and using words like responsibility, I'm not using the word wild. So what I'm trying to work out is, if we're talking about transparency, what can that look like? And there are a couple of things that I think need to happen. And one is more interrogation of predictive ground truth and the kind of figuration of the black box, because the people who have designed these systems keep saying it's a black box. We don't know. We just know it works. And to say, well, we just know it works, like, so trying to understand what is the truth claim in terms of it just works, because we need to have some more things to hold on to if we're going to indeed even understand what should be regulated. Mm-hmm. And this is because it's generative. ChatGPT knows more now than before it was released a year ago, because it was trained and then it continues to be tuned behind the scenes. Thank you, Kenyan workers, but because of us. It knows a whole bunch more. I would have to check, but I'm going to guess that when it was first released, it didn't know Spanish. It didn't know German, and now it does, because people are using it, or it's reading other things, combination of both. So here you've got a technology that is generative in a substantial way, that it's not solid state, it doesn't say the same. And your Google search, it's tweaked, it changes, and the damn ads and sponsored links, like you've seen how these things change, but there's a way in which it at least feels like Twitter has been that chaos for the whole time, and different features have changed. But at the very least, I think we should recognize what the wildness is and understand better, not just try to shut down hallucination, but where's hallucination interesting? And where is it not? I mean, obviously, people, the example is in an ER room where you've got AI augmented tech, you don't want hallucination. You want to know that when something a direction is given or an assessment is given, that it is correct, or as correct as it can be. So these are kind of the spaces in terms of how can we separate signal from noise and be more precise about what is being asked in terms of regulating. This idea like full stop on building any models that are bigger than what exists. I need to understand better if the size of the model is really the foremost determinant, because that's certainly what, like, that's what Benji says. That's what people who are authorities are saying. But OpenAI was able to produce something that has been very effective in a way that other companies weren't. And it's not because they had more training data than Google. Nobody has more training data than Google. So what else is going on here? What about an audit? There was a period of time when OpenAI was going to get sued, so it had to show its training data. I'm not hearing anything about that anymore. Getty was suing, New York Times was going to sue. So there are other things that, yeah, so I'm not sure that my liberation of AI is to give it agency by like consuming the bodies of Black people, but I don't know, we can talk about
I
that
wasn't
later.
trying to say that. I know why you said that, but I wasn't trying to say that.
I see some questions in the chat. If you have any questions as an online participant, it will be shared with the speakers. So please put it in there. And thank you very much to the panel and to everybody. Questions to ask anybody? We can go out into the hall because it's incredibly hot here. Maybe we can talk a little more. So thank you. It is hot. It is hot in there. Having read your stuff to know what. Like, to know what you're making the first of all.
I try to be consistent. It's so funny because in the thing I was editing last night, I said in my earlier work, I said XXX, and the copy editor was like, "Can you type this work?" And in my response, I was like, "No, I say this in everything."
You know when they say,
I love the literature you cited, murder bots, it's amazing.
Have you listened to the new one?
I haven't yet.
This one, Murderbot has PTSD from the